Okay, welcome everybody. So this is welcome to the roundtable discussion of the national reports for the Voices for Justice project. My name is Paula Grenier. I'm the coordinator of the project, which is run by the Validity Foundation. And I will just go around my colleagues here. We have on my left, Oana Dodu from Romania, Monica Gulakati from Lithuania, Maria Kresteva from Bulgaria, Miran Spek from Croatia, and Tatiana Knap from Slovenia. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'll say a little bit about the project and what we've been doing over the last year or two, and then introduce the reports. So the Voices for Justice project is focused on the rights and experiences of people with disabilities who are victims of crime. There's a particular focus in the project on information and effective communications, because this is the basis for which people with disabilities and anybody in fact are able to access justice and participate in the justice process. In our experience at Validity Foundation, we are specialists in disability rights. People with disabilities face systematic discrimination in the criminal justice system. They are often find it difficult to report crimes and face it's hard for police to know how sometimes to talk with people with intellectual disabilities. It's often hard for people to access police stations, courtrooms, and it's hard for professionals in the system to know what kind of accommodations are needed in order for people to be able to participate and really have their rights upheld. So this was our starting point. The project itself, Voices for Justice, is an EU co-funded project. It's has taken place in 7 countries and is continuing actually. We have partners that I've introduced who not only come from the 7 countries we're working in, but bring a wide range of skills and expertise from victim support, social work, law, criminal justice, disability rights, advocacy. So we're really brought together a strong team to work on this project. The project has been carrying out research at the national level and also at the international level. And following the publication of our research reports, we will be looking into promising practices and publishing practical tools for practitioners in the field. We also aim to set international standards with the international report and to address what we see as some of the limitations of the Victims' Rights Directive in the European Union. So to really find a way for victims' rights legislation to properly uphold the rights of people with disabilities in criminal justice. Over the past year and a half, we started in the summer 2 years ago. So we've been going for a year and a half to 2 years. The research has been taking place at the national level in each country. There was a common methodology adopted, which focused on the normal desk research, interviews, and observations. And I just want to say that our work was quite affected by COVID and the lockdown. And this has meant that some of the way that the work has proceeded has, we've really had to adapt and adjust to what the options were and what we could do. But I think everybody has managed to reach a wide range of professionals and people with disabilities. So victim support services, lawyers, judges, prosecutors, police, social workers, carers have all contributed to the research in all countries. And I think I would highlight one of the findings, the very high level findings, was that it's really hard to find people with good experience of working with people with disabilities in criminal justice. many people are not familiar, and we were really, even though our expectations, I think, were not that we would find great practices out there, I think even we were quite shocked at how few people really see people with disabilities and really appreciate the kinds of crimes that people are subject to. In the next session, each partner will present very briefly one aspect of their report. So we will try to paint a complete picture by presenting one key finding and one key recommendation from each country. And yeah, I think that's it from me. I would like to hand over to Oana. I'm from Romania, from the Center for Legal Resources, and she will tell us about some of the findings from Romania. Thank you, Oana.
Thank you, Paula, for the introduction. My name is Oana Dodu. I'm from Center for Legal Resources, an NGO based in Bucharest, Romania, which acts for the respect of human rights, equal opportunities, and free access to a fair trial for persons with disabilities, with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities that are mostly institutionalized in state care centers. What I would like to highlight from our national report is the availability of data and information, and what this data have shown us about the number of victims with disabilities, with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities of the crimes. So the national report provides an overview of the current situation of victims with disabilities of crimes in Romania in terms of their access to rights provided by the Victim Rights Directive, with particular reference to the specific procedures for accessing psychosocial and legal support and assistance services, as it should be from the directive's sayings, as well as the way in which individual needs assessment are carried out from the first contact with the judicial authority. The results of the report have been carried out since September 2020 till June 2021. And as Paula said, it was a work combining qualitative and quantitative research. But what I would like to highlight is that we sent over 90 requests of for public inquiries on based on the law you see on the screen on free access to information of public interest. So to the address to the state institutions that are responsible for protecting and support victims of crime, to see how it's been in practice, their rights have been respected, or the directives has been implemented. Unfortunately, we did not receive answers to all the requests we sent, but we managed to see a bit of the current situation of victims with disabilities in Romania. One of the interesting aspects we found throughout the report is that although the Victim Directive says that it should be created a special register of crimes referred to the state authorities, it hasn't been actually created in practice because we have those 47 counties of General Direction of Social Assistance and Child Protection that can deal with victims of crimes with disabilities, and the crimes are referred to them. They should offer legal and social assistance free, but only half of the counties have managed to create such a register. The others giving the reason of its lack because of the absence of the service itself. So victims have nowhere to report or have no place to seek legal or social aid. Also, another reason for that was the lack of referrals to those services. So in most of the countries, they were saying that no victim complained at all, which we find very curious, that there was, throughout those 2 years, there was no complaint of victims with disabilities. And of course, for 11 of those counties, there was no data available at all. So we might say that although the state has the obligation according to the directive, it still hasn't been implemented according to the law. Also, we found out that there were some crimes committed against persons with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities, but there was no segregated data according to which type of disabilities the victim had, the exact number of crimes, whether they were or not institutionalized in a state care centers, or any other data available. Another interesting fact that we have found throughout the report was about hate crimes against people with disabilities, because in our criminal legislation we have this article that gives higher punishment if crime is committed with the motive of disability. But one of the main problems we found out is that even though we have this provision in our legislation, the General Director of Police does not collect data segregated to this specific discrimination criteria. So there is actually no possibility to have exact data about how many crimes were committed against persons with disability based on that motive. We could only collect general data about the crimes that were committed against persons throughout the last 2 years. What we also did was asking the courts and the tribunals to provide us some criminal decisions concerning persons with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities, to see if at the level of judicial court they collect such segregated data. We only received only 24 such court decisions after they searched in their own internal system. But we found that they were pretty interesting, and the analyzed revealed that concerning the type of crime, out of 24 decisions, in 8 cases there was about crime against sexual freedom and integrity, such as sexual assault and rape. There were also 3 cases about trafficking and exploitation of vulnerable persons, such as human trafficking, and only 2 cases of life-threatening crimes, such as attempt to murder with an aggravated circumstance. Those decisions, it was noted that the defendants were either family members or of the aggrieved person, such as victim's father, brother, or even the aunt that was the carer of the victim. Or in some cases, thank you, Bruno, there was a person from the center that the person was institutionalized in, so from a center of adults with disabilities. And you can see in the example on the screen that in this case of sexual crime, the victims were persons with intellectual disabilities institutionalized in a state care centers, and the aggressor was one of their colleagues, another person with intellectual disabilities, but with higher authority in the center. So that person was more violent, put them to do different works. But and it is not shown on the screen, but the full decision states that the aggressor was making those crimes in relation with an employee from the center. So we should always see that the employees from the centers can become aggressors, because they also have authority relation to the person that have been institutionalized. So those persons, throughout their authority towards the person with disability, manage by coercive means to make them commit criminal acts themselves or to become victim of sexual offenses. What we would like to highlight is that we kind of have 5 key elements for solving the problems, but ensuring access to justice is all the more important for people with disability, with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities, especially to them, because they are more vulnerable to violence and neglect. And when they are institutionalized in a state care center, no one can see them. They have no real access to justice because those centers are located in a rural area. They are far away from big cities, far away from communication means. So what one of the main lacks is that one of the procedural accommodation, which may include, for example, provision of interpreters to facilitate alternative and augmentative communication, including the sign language barrier. There's also lack of availability of legal and judicial information in accessible formats of complaints. There should be a provision of assistive and personal assistive technology, modification of the mode of hearing. For example, there should be allocated a higher time for the hearing. There should be different hours according to the person's schedule. Maybe the wording of questions should be changed so they would understand what the judicial authorities would like for them to answer. And all in all, I think it's we found out that it's about procedure flexibility from the judicial authorities, because those barriers are more detrimental to access that justice for people with disabilities, and especially those ones that are under legal guardianship and who depend on their guardian or curator for drafting, singing, filing these complaints, or finding probation for their trials, bringing action to justice, and rarely, when this happens, appeals. So unfortunately, and I'll end with this, at this moment, there is no record of the number of persons with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities who have received legal aid from the state, although they should receive such legal aid freely from every country that they are in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joanna. I think this really introduces the topic incredibly well. It points to many of the challenges that people with disabilities are facing, and not least the very big challenge of there being very little data and understanding and acknowledgement that within the formal institutional system of the extent of the problem. Anna, thank you so much. And I would ask you to swap places. Thank you. Welcome, Monica. And Monica, you have the hardest name. Gulakaite. Is that good?
Gulakaite.
Gulakaite. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Monica Gulakaite from Mental Health Perspectives from Lithuania. I'm glad to be here today to present the findings of the Lithuanian report and one case in particular that I will jump right into. So a blind person was traveling in Vilnius by a taxi, and as he was getting out of the car, he noticed that his phone was missing. And in his own words, a mobile phone for a blind person is his eyes, usually and mostly the main means of communication, navigation, money management, and so on. So after he did manage to contact the police, instead of coming to him, they asked for him to come to the nearest police station in person, even though he was not in his hometown. He did not have his ID with him, and he actually had a visual disability, and he has just lost his phone. So he felt completely ignored by the police and not taken seriously. A telephone probably was seen as one of the 1,000 devices lost or stolen in the city, but for him, the first communication and the disregard of the importance of this telephone for him, he felt that he experienced more damage from the encounter with the police rather than just lost his property. So even though the investigation was started after he submitted his complaint, he was not informed about it. He learned it by accident from the press, and he had to contact and reach out to the police personally to ask questions about the procedure, about the process, about the next steps. Eventually, the case was dismissed because of a lack of evidence, but this whole situation illustrates that humane attitude and respectful communication is, I think we can go to, yeah, thank you. Respectful communication is usually missing in victims' encounters with the police. A lack of general support or lack of information about the process and procedures, from my personal experience, are quite often noticeable in the encounters with the police, but actually persons with the disabilities are more vulnerable and get more affected by this ignorance and not knowing how to communicate properly with the victim. Similar tendencies were actually observed concerning both the reporting and the pre-trial stages. And we can go to the next slide. And in the light of this particular case, some recommendations were drawn up. Firstly, to give specific and adequate attention to education and training of law enforcement officials. The training should be continuous even after they finish the university or school, get their degree, and importantly, they should be based on Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities and human rights-based approach. The training also should cover all the barriers faced by persons with disabilities. And finally, it is recommended to adopt official guidelines for law enforcement officers implementing the provision of the European Union Victims' Rights Directive on victims' rights to understand and to be understood. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thank you. And thank you very much for bringing a case to us and an example to show, to illustrate and the experience of somebody who really was not able to be treated in what we would expect in a normal, humane, respectful way about a crime that was committed against him. And I think this points to the levels of structural discrimination that can exist in the system, but also for many people, this leads to secondary victimization. This is a traumatic experience in itself to even be engaging with the justice system. So thank you so much for bringing that to us, and thank you, Monica. I will now ask to change places. In case anybody watching is wondering why we have to change places, it's because we have a speaker in front of us, and we need to be clearly audible. So, hi, welcome, Maria, and please.
Hello, I'm Maria Kristeva from Bulgaria. I'm here to present our national report. So I'll start first with some more general findings about our report, and it's that indeed in Bulgaria we face many systematic gaps which we need to overcome. So Bulgaria has this justice system who respects fully and equally the rights of persons with disabilities. Due to common prejudice, persons with disabilities, victims with disabilities in Bulgaria are often left out of the justice system, of the justice process, where many crimes against persons with disabilities remain unrecognized as such in the first place. The lack of real community-based services which to support independent living and decision-making makes persons with disabilities rather dependent on their caregivers, and this often results in in situations of severe conflict of interest, which makes the victims with disabilities invisible to the justice system. In our report, we analyze and comment on these issues in more details. So Yes, read the reports, they're now available.
Yeah.
This is the best part. There you can, we present like rather curious but yet devastating examples of from real life of how victims with disabilities remain out of the justice system, remain unheard. Their voices remain unheard. So now I'll just make a mention of only one recommendation, one finding that, thank you, Bruno, that we make in our report. And we find that recommendation rather important because we believe that if we follow that recommendation, if we fulfill it, it basically will open the door to solving like a huge portions of the problems that we found out. And so yeah, this is the effective communication with persons with disability, and we believe that what victims with disabilities are saying needs to be validated, needs to be heard and validated in the first place in order to them to truly access justice. In Bulgaria, victims with disabilities are usually excluded from the justice process in the very beginning on the grounds of expertise made by a psychiatrist usually. And these expertises are based primarily on the medical documentation about the person. And to be honest, not just the medical documentation, but rather on the prejudice about the diagnosis even. So there is practically no assessment of the individual capacities of the person. So our recommendation indeed is that Bulgaria needs to formally introduce the role of intermediary, a justice intermediary / communication specialist, and those will be the experts who experts in the justice process who could translate what the victims with disability really experienced and suffered. So that's
thank you so much. Thank you, Maria, and thank you for bringing a solution to us and helping point us to some of what needs to change and what we need. Thank you. And I will invite Miran. Miran, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So I introduce Miran Spek from Croatia, from Victim Support Services in Croatia.
Good morning or good day, everybody. I would like to thank Maria for a beautiful introduction to the Victim Support Croatia research. So my name is Miran. I'm coming from Victim and Witness Support Croatia, and I need to thank my colleague Maya, who is not seen now on the camera, because we both work on this research and national report. I have to say that we found many gaps in practical implementation of the victims' rights in Croatia. One of these is individual needs assessment of the victims. So I have to say first, what is individual needs assessment? So this is a tool, this is the victims' rights, which primary goal or the purpose is to determine special protection measure in concrete criminal procedure of the victim. What are the protection measures? Those are either the way how to communicate or give statement, not to communicate, but to give statement to the court, so that the victim can give statement through the audio, video, teleconferencing or other tools. Some other protection measures would be the avoidance with the perpetrator, meaning that the victim is going to sit in another room, not in the courtroom. But as you can already see, those are the targeting only the secondary traumatization prevention. It's not about support, it's not about communication, and it's not about information, unfortunately. what we would like that this is also and about communication and about support and information. When we talk about Croatia, although this instrument, this tool, this right was implemented from the Victims' Rights Directive 3 years ago, we'll still have many reluctances in investigation bodies, meaning police, prosecution, and judges, to fully implement individual assessment. They would say that this is an administrative burden for them. In some moments, they would say this is a psychological element, which they are not trained, which is a fault. This is not like this. So what we want to say that during the interviews with the police, prosecution, and judges, they have all said that they can recognize a person with disability, not the type of disability. And as Maria said, they don't know how to communicate with people with disability or certain types of disability. That's why they need additional expert, as Maria said, intermediates. That's very important. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel because we have spoken with one of the judge. At that time, it was a judge in the county court. Now this judge is Bruno, you can change the slide, thank you. So we talked with this judge is now judge of the High Criminal Court, which is excellent because this High Criminal Court is appeal court of the county courts. And she was using individual needs assessment quite broadly, not only to prevent some kind of intimidation and secondary traumatization, but even for support of the victims. And she said, I quote, in practice, if applied well, the needs of assessment could be used to adapt to the criminal procedure to the victim's needs, especially for the victims with disabilities. Meaning, finally, after centuries and centuries, the victim could be in focus of the criminal procedure, because now only the perpetrators are in the focus. So our recommendations is that individual needs assessment must be carried out on all levels, that the prosecution, that the police and the judges have to use it, and not only them, all other institutions and organizations that come with victims, like Center for Social Welfare. And the secondary recommendations is that it should be focused on the specific communication needs of the victims, particularly regard with the people with disabilities. So I was short, but if you have any questions, I thank you for it.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for highlighting how important and fundamental communications is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's give floor to Slovenia.
Slovenia is joining us now. Hi, Tatiana, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here today.
I think you should start, yes.
Okay. As three partner organizations from Slovenia, as in other partner countries, identified many focus points in our research, in our report. What I would like to focus on today is accessible information. This is, but just in a small fragment, in information that is available for victims of crime and can be obtained at different online and offline points, such as you get this information individually from internet, for example, or you can get this handed by different professionals. Issue here is the issue that we identified, the challenge that lies before us is there is poor accessibility of online and print materials and applications of the public authorities for people with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. Not just poor accessibility, but there is not so much of this online and print materials. And saying again, I'm only here focusing on written information, not, for example, on spoken information or direct communication, which of course brings then additional issues and challenges, as we already learned a bit today. We did analysis of the print and online materials that were available to us. We invited our validators, people with intellectual disabilities, to give us a little advice on this. And we found that the brochures that are existing are crowded with data, which is hard to read. The font is usually too small because when we are providing information, we sometimes try to save a little bit of space and not give so much money out for print. The contrast is too low in case they use colored letters on white background or vice versa. So for example, we could have like light blue letters on a green background, which is impossible almost to read. The problem is also the brochures use quite standard language, even professional language. The standard language can be quite complicated in Slovenia. We do not have this concept of plain language yet, which would give the administration, the public administration, task to communicate with the citizens in the language they will be able to perceive and so on. Which would be advisable for this type of information, regardless if the victims are with disabilities or not. Long multi-clause sentences are used in those brochures and so on. In general, those brochures used by public authorities cannot be considered accessible and would present an issue for many people with intellectual disabilities trying to retrieve some useful information, but also for elderly people, for example, or people who have trouble with sight and many other groups of people also. And this is just the brochures that, of course, meant for people who do read, who use written language and print or online information. If we move to the images, they are sometimes absent, sometimes they are inappropriate, serve as a decorative element in the brochures. And of course, the audio information based on those brochures is lacking. Moving on to recommendations on this. In our opinion, based on what we identified, the materials would have to be systematically improved. And especially we would need extra materials for to inform victims with disabilities. And then again, if this was done in easy to read, in plain language, this would also, what the practice shows us, this is also useful for everyone, not just people with disabilities who have some specific communication barriers. This, of course, means that the country would have to provide information for people with intellectual disabilities in easy to read language that I already mentioned, and make it available through courts, police, and social work centers, and possibly also other points of contact. The responsibility for this, like generally speaking, on the level of the state, would lie upon Ministry of Justice, for example, Ministry of Labor, Family, Social Affairs, and Equal Opportunities, that is in charge of all matters related to people with disabilities, and then Ministry of the Interior for this whole public administration. Our recommendation too would be to develop and implement, of course, clear standards for providing information and communication assistance for people with different needs in all stages of the proceedings. We do realize this is a complicated and hard task. We do have standards and specialists, for example, for easy to read language in Slovenia. We have excellent specialists and materials in the topics of sign language and language of people with the blind deafness, which have been a part of our constitution since last year. And the idea here is to identify all this and more and provide a tool or tools for the system, for the professionals in the system to be able to communicate efficiently with people and then people with disabilities. So this would be our main point for this fragment of accessible information, as already said, and we haven't even started discussing spoken communication, two-way communication in the legal proceedings. So this would be, in shortly, this from us. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You can stay here now,
Okay,
actually. Unfortunately, one of our colleagues from Czech and from Slovakia, Czechia and Slovakia, is unable to join us today, Anna Šleskova. So we are just going to present her work briefly, and I will just say a few words about it. So I think one of the key findings in Slovakia was the right, in theory, that people had to legal aid, but that in practice was extremely complicated and was at the judge's discretion. So as such, it was not a right that people could exercise. I'm going to just, like I said, I'm going to talk briefly about this. The other issue about accessing legal aid is the way in which it's not accessible from the beginnings of the criminal proceedings, and certainly not at the stage of reporting, which is the point at which many people face the earliest barriers. If a crime has been committed, this is often the point at which somebody needs support in order to know what to do, how to report a crime, and what their rights are. It's too easy for the system to put up too many barriers. So it's a right that could be extended, I think, to go to the next slide, thank you. It could be extended. It would be an effective way to create a link between the justice system and the victim of the crime, with a professional who knows the legal system but also understands the needs of victims with disabilities. And this is, I know, one of the key findings that has come out in Slovakia. I will not say anything more about it now, but I really would recommend, for those of you interested, please, we'll give links to the reports to follow up and read the report. And I will now take over again for Czechia. So in the Czech Republic, there were some early findings that, again, I think pointed to some practices that could really help support victims with disabilities. And this is quite specifically through the Probation and Mediation Service, that is a national network. It is accessible to victims, and it's a structure that could adapt and be flexible to victims with disabilities if the appropriate steps were made. I think there are other ideas also coming out of Czechia, focused more on mediation and restorative justice techniques, which provide a less bureaucratic institutional approach, maybe something that is more flexible, more adaptable by its nature to the needs of the individual victim, and would provide a much more accessible, both physically, emotionally, and legally. These are at the moment suggestions and ideas, but they're certainly point to the fact that there are many ways in which systems could potentially adapt and actually uphold the rights of people with disabilities who are victims of crime. Bruno, could you help us with questions?
Wonderful presentations of everyone. It was really wonderful to hear findings in each country, different recommendations, and actually similar issues that happen in all of them. So since the issues are similar, I'm wondering the reasons why these happened are also similar. So I wonder if you could, all of you could actually expand a little bit why these issues occur in your countries. Is there a particular reason? Is it related to institutions? Is it related to the professionals specifically? If you could, speakers could expand on that, that would be great.
Miran?
I could start first, maybe.
Thank you.
Regarding the Croatia, I would honestly say it's about tradition and mentality of the infrastructure of the judiciary, because not only that entire system of support, this entire judiciary system, criminal proceedings system, in the focus of the perpetrator, how to defend him, how to give him rights, and because of the afraid of the European Court, they're not focused on the victims. Also, mentality of the judges, of the prosecution in Croatia is again focused on the perpetrator. And to be honest, I think that they are maybe even afraid of the vulnerability of the certain person. I would be short, but that I would say that this is pretty much what we have found in this report.
Oh, Anna? Thank you, Miran. Thank you.
In addition to what Miran saying, I would expand to the lack of understanding for the whole community, because sometimes in Romania they still view the person with intellectual or psychosocial disabilities as a person that only needs to be protected. So they forbidden a person with disabilities from an institution, for example, to have access to the exterior world to seek and find justice, or to have any kind of information about, oh, so this happened to me, this means I'm a victim, so I'm entitled to get justice done. But often they stay in those centers throughout their entire life, and they don't even know that they were or not victims of crimes against them. So that's, I think, one of the main reasons that there are few people with disabilities that get justice or get to see a judge in a court, I don't know, for the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think that definitely comes out in all the countries, this issue of overprotecting in order to, and the impact is to deny access to justice, in fact. And I think that's a really clear, thank you for making that point, Joanna. Can I pass Tatiana?
Yes, of course, I can only continue here, like from what was already mentioned, like Slovenia is one of the most institutionalized countries in the Europe. I'm not an expert on this. We have better experts on this from Slovenia here, but this is a big problem. It's not also just this that the institutions are there, that they are worlds by themselves, where different rules sort of apply, that we are protecting all these people, but not taking the responsibility to let them be as independent as they want to be, as they can be, to give them tools to, but just take this, let's just put everyone somewhere and now we will protect them. And in this way, people with intellectual disabilities can be in one way observed from the society as children, and in other way as not the real citizens. And for countries like Slovenia, this is sometimes connected with this issue of legal capacity and so on. They are not the people who will give a lot of votes in elections. And so on. And the other thing, speaking for Slovenia again, we have this heavy traditional social care system and other systems, health and so on, and it's difficult to break these barriers. So where to go from here? We can start with little steps from within. Projects like this are like good opportunities to do so, but it takes a long time to move this elephant. I think this mastodon, someone from Portugal once said, this mastodon from one point to another. So I think we should not lose the energy and the focus we have in projects like this, and just keep pushing. And this would be from my point of view.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Would you like to add?
I can just add maybe the first reason for all that is happening is prejudice, like let's say. But I believe that if we have a good proportion of community-based services and good trainings, we can. If we have a good portion of community-based services and good trainings, I believe we can overcome this prejudice, like in a practical way.
Can you say more about that? What could you imagine?
Well, I could say that like prejudice is something that it's just a thought, it's just an expectation to someone. But if you have the right tools, like she said, if you have the right specialists, the right trainings, you will be able to like step a little bit further from this thought, from this expectation, and to see that in reality, that's not what you thought. So, but yes, regarding like other reasons, other problems that we have, again, that's the really high level of dependency of persons with disability in Bulgaria, of dependency on their caregivers. And these are not just the high numbers of persons with disabilities who are institutionalized, not only in the big institution, former big institutions, but also in the new small group homes who are again replicating this institutionalization model. But we are also speaking here about the persons in the community who are, like, for example, in Bulgaria, we still have the guardianship, like the partial guardianship and the plenary guardianship. So we have in the community, we have this dependency on the caregiver, who sometimes is the guardian or some relative, because we have another problem with the personal assistance. We don't have like really good personal assistance services. So yeah, it's mostly the dependence and the lack of basically trainings and really community-based services focused on the independent living and on the decision making, the supported decision making that will help, that will support persons with disabilities be less dependent and be heard in the first place.
Thank you.
I must agree with all the panelists from my side, from my perspective and the presentation. Maybe I could add that in Lithuania, persons with disabilities are still stigmatized and often are unseen, and that is why it is difficult for people to communicate with them in a respectful manner, and especially if we do not have enough training for the officials, these problems that I just presented come up, and still it's a huge issue in Lithuania.
Thank you. Miran, you want to add something, of course, yes.
Thank you, my colleagues, for mentioning the trainings. The trainings must also include NGO support activities and the person with disabilities. Because if the judiciary doesn't see the person with disability and how to act, those trainings will not be efficient. And also, I wanted to state that it is in Croatia, but I would say that it is throughout the European Union. We have wonderful individuals in the systems. Yet the system cannot be or based on the individuals. It is standardized. That's the problem. And also wanted to say that that's why we need European Union to unite us and the national law in case of something like this.
Yeah. Thank you, Miran. I think that's maybe I will just step in and quickly just make the point about the European Union. And our work has centered around the Victims' Rights Directive. And if I look at what those rights are, to understand and be understood, the right to information at all stages of the justice process, the right to support, the right to participate in the criminal justice process, as well as the right to protection and individual assessment. I mean, I think it's very clear from the discussion, from your presentations, that people with disabilities are really facing enormous barriers for these rights to be upheld. And these are the rights that we should be upholding, and that people in the system should be making sure people with disabilities have access to. There is,
Just one sentence. As the directive said, it's a minimal standard.
Yes, that's also the case. It's a minimal standard. So thank you for emphasizing that. Oh, Anna.
But I think that for the partner saying that we felt throughout the research report that the Victim Rights Directive lacks its coordination with the CRPD. So often those dispositions are not provided by the Victim Rights Directive. And that people with disabilities should have free access to justice and should benefit from procedural accommodation throughout the entire procedures, not only in the criminal matter, but in the civil matters. But we see, and I think it's the same for the 6 countries, that we are still far away from ensuring a minimum and fair access for people with disabilities.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And yes, that's really. We have a couple of questions. There's questions about, which I will turn to now. So there's a question about easy read materials. Do you want to read? Can you read the question?
No.
No. Okay.
Too far, sorry.
It's a bit far for me as well.
Yeah.
Bruno, could you just read it out for us?
Sure.
Loudly.
With regards to easy read information in legal proceedings, I see the objections by legal professionals, police force themselves, not willing to make it more accessible, arguing that legal speech should stay intact. Do you see this in your countries as well? Do you have any good practices or examples from other countries?
Well, from what it happens usually, we have not worked yet so much with professionals from the legal system. We have from professionals for social care system and so on, but also a little bit we did easy to read information like guides through laws and things like this. What usually happens is there is a lot of negotiation going on. Even though we are making easy to read information, like accessible information, we have to make sure that the information stands and it's true. So we have to include the professionals that work in the field. Whenever we are doing something from the legal field, this is not the way to do it. Okay, now this, we think this is this, we validate it with the end users and that's that. No, we have to include the professionals. But what happens a lot of the times is we negotiate on words. We ask them, is this what we adapted your point to? Is this what it stands? And they usually say, okay, no, these words cannot be used, this is not true. And then we speak and we negotiate. And in the end, we see that it's exactly what was meant by that. But the legal language is complicated. Sometimes we have a feeling as like specialists in accessible information, it is not meant to be black or white. This is it and this is that. That is why there is always like the laws, for example, and whatever considers politics and so on. It's hard to do in easy language because easy language has to be very direct. We have to know what we are communicating, and this is sometimes tricky in the legal sphere. But do involve the professionals because the agreement always happens in the end. So that would be it's a long procedure, but it's a worthwhile one.
And it sounds like a procedure that can also improve understanding.
And that would be
the
understanding, and that would be my point also. We discussed trainings a little bit, we touched upon about that. Let's make people with disabilities not just the validators of the information and so on, but also trainers in the trainings, because our experience is whenever we are in workshops with professionals, of course I and my colleagues, we are speaking blah blah blah, and this is this and this is that, and whenever our colleagues with disabilities are the trainers and they share their personal experience and what they learned and what they can give to them, it's always so much better and the point comes across much easier. So this is one important thing maybe to add to the tools. Let's be inclusive in all the process, and let's not do things without people with disabilities.
Thank you, and I think the point is well made. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody want to add anything about easy read, or we no? Yeah, no, Tatiana is our expert. So, there is a question about the Victims' Rights Directive and whether it's sufficient to improve the situations of people with disabilities. Do you think that the directive as it stands is enough? Is it what?
Well, directive is now in the process of evaluation, meaning that even the European Union understands that at the time of 2012 was not sufficient. This is only one document. So, as I said, this is the minimal standards. It's up to the member states to recognize and expand it. Right? Maybe one of the goals should be to make a law on victims, specialized like in some states, static law, and then put everything that we need in this law. So it's just one thing, but it is the, let's say, path in which the member states should go.
Okay, I understand. Yeah. Okay, I see what you mean. So it's a good route and it's a good device for us to use in order to try and pursue these rights. Oh, Anna, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I feel that sometimes the states do not understand how they should be implementing the directive. So there is a long process, and as we stated in our report, they mostly don't get the disposition implemented, and they do nothing with the national legislation, not even the slightest training of the professional that work in the first field with the person with disability, not mentioning that the judicial have no knowledge of laws for persons with disabilities, and even though we have some extensive laws in Romania, I think the state should collaborate more with maybe the European Commission in understanding how they should change their internal legislation to be according at least to the Victim Rights Directive and in the fortunate case with the CRPD.
Okay. I would just like to add here that perhaps the next logical step would be that we need this in easy to read.
Thank you.
I would also say that maybe still the directive needs like a little bit of improvement.
Yeah.
And I will give only just one example, and it's like a really basic thing, and that's the definition of who is the victim. When a person with disability who experienced the crime should be treated as a victim already. And that is kind of a problem because, like, at least in Bulgaria, and I believe the rest of the countries did the same, we copy-pasted that definition in our law as well. And this starter point when the person should be treated as a victim, when this moment is not clear. I mean, it seems from the definition that you need first to have sufficient evidence so you can consider what happened as a crime, and only after that you should start treating this person as the victim, which is not the right time. I mean, we have this like gap in time in which the person and his rights would not be respected. And this happens in Bulgaria. And I think because of only this definition.
In Croatia, it's not the situation.
Okay.
As soon as the crime happens, she's the victim or he's the victim. For example, if you have compensation, it strictly says that you have right to compensation 6 months after the event happened, not after the complaint was happening in police, and the event crime happened. So maybe you should look at all.
But so that's a problem in Croatia.
Crime might happen, then you're the victim. So not when you go to police.
You have a crime, like it's the definition in Bulgaria is the same. Like we need to have the crime, but what you need to say that this something will happen is a crime. You need the sufficient evidence.
No, maybe in Bulgaria, but in Croatia, as long as something is
right.
But it's not.
So it can be a crime and there can be a victim, even though there isn't an investigation or a prosecution.
Right.
I also know, I think, Anna, I think you made the point about as well that the Rights Directive does not cover for civil proceedings, which can also be an issue, as I understand it, particularly for compensation claims, which again, people have the right to compensation, but if they lose their victims' rights in pursuing that, that can be very, very difficult for people.
In Croatia, compensation is given by the Ministry of Justice, by the state. And it says that the victim does not need to know who is the perpetrator, just need to file a complaint. So she doesn't even have to have evidence about all this. It's for the explanation, the law is that the state is guilty for not providing security for this person.
That's, yeah. I know from the Czech, as I said, unfortunately, Anna is not with us, but I know in Czechia, there was a case of somebody who wanted to pursue a compensation claim and had to then pursue it through the civil courts. They lost their rights under the Victims' Rights Directive, and it meant that they would have to face the perpetrator in court. And this meant that the procedure had to fall apart. It was not pursued.
Thank you, Paula, for this. In Croatia, we're trying to see what can be happened here, because you're the right.
Yeah.
Either in domestic violence cases or any kind of other cases, when victim goes to the civic case, then all the rights are gone, and then she faces the perpetrator. So in domestic violence case, they won't be the perpetrator, but then if she have a alimony or something, then that's why we want to maybe to persuade the government of Croatia to expand certain rights to even the civic cases. For example, the person of trust only comes to criminal procedure, but then it's essential right to be in civic cases.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Maren. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything else to add on the Victims' Rights Directive and its is it sufficient?
I could only add that in Lithuania we see obstacles in implementing the directive for all the victims, despite the disability. But of course, persons with disabilities get affected more greatly. So
yeah, thank you. And it is, we do understand that this is a challenge for many, many victims. Yeah. Are there any more questions? I'm struggling to read it.
No, I can read it for you.
Thank you.
So just very striking from the reports in Bulgaria that persons with disabilities might not, professionals might consider they're not able to give credible information. So the question is this a case for in all your countries? Do professionals consider that persons with disabilities are actually able to participate or not?
Good question. Thank you very much. It's a really important point, this issue of credibility. Anna.
Yeah, it often happens that when a person with disabilities, and I think especially if it's a woman that's been institutionalized for a long time, goes, for example, to the police and starts speaking about how she's been maybe sexually assaulted by one of the employees from the center, the police will say, get out of here, we don't believe you, who sent you here, or even if it's the case when a person institutionalized wants to make a complaint at the chief of the center. They will protect their employees most of the time. So although we have those special registers on reporting complaints and crime in the centers, it's funny when we look at them because often there is no complaint, everything is good. So there was no crime at all reported, I don't know, in the last 10 years in most of the institutions. But when you speak directly to a person with disability, they have some complaints, and most of them they don't get to speak to a professional about that.
Thank you.
I think this is also this credibility issue. It's also a wider problem. Like we had people who live in institutions. We had, for example, a lady who went to the social work center because she wanted to explore her options in living in community and so on. And what they did is they called the institution she lives in, and we have this person here. Would you want to come collect her and things like that? So it's this. I think it's also combined with this thing of shifted responsibility, or not support decision making, but let's shift the decision making to someone else, to someone who we will be able to communicate things better with and not struggle with the communication barriers and so on. And it's all this package of the Institute of Guardianship, or the labels that people have, like you have this label of being a psychiatric patient, you have this label of being institutionalized. So it's a whole wide, and I can only imagine that in the criminal proceedings this can only be more evident.
Yeah, I forgot to add that although sometimes authorities do give them a little credibility when they are joined by professionals such as a psychologist or a social assistant from the center. But it's rarely that these cases happen because no one from the state institutions, or sometimes they accompany the person in the court, and it happens most of the time when NGOs find a psychologist that goes with the victim with disabilities in front of the police or prosecutor or even the judiciary, and translates what the authorities want to say in those you know, wood language and very formal judicial language.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you, Anna. Maria.
I believe there is one more thing, and it's the medical approach again, but in a sense that sometimes what victims with disabilities experience is addressed to the diagnosis. You know, there might be like a change in the mood or in the behavior of the person due to the crime that has been experienced. But then, because of this medical approach to the person, it's often this change of behavior is often addressed to the diagnosis, and they are giving like more medications for that. They're not searching for the real reason for if anything wrong happened.
Everything is a symptom of the whatever you were diagnosed with.
So this is another huge problem.
And it links up with this issue. I mean, it's of protecting or medicating or not allowing people to have a voice, to participate, to really allow themselves to say what's happened and what they want. Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts on the question? Thank you all. Thank you all very much. I think that's great. Thank you for your contributions, and thank you all for the amazing work that you've done, I think, to bring these stories and these experiences to light, because I think this is incredibly valuable for people to know and to understand better, not only what goes on, but also what's possible and what some of the solutions can be. I mean, everybody has ideas for steps that can be taken to address some of these challenges and to start to bring down the barriers that people experience when they're trying to access justice. And I really urge everybody to check out the reports. I just say a couple of words of what's happening next in the project. At the national level, the partners will be working in their countries to disseminate the work, to start to work with different cross-disciplinary groups to make sure that the professionals in the system understand better what the issues are and what some of the solutions are, and involving people with disabilities in all these activities. At the international level, we will be publishing an international report analysing, bringing together all the national findings and analysing them and evaluating them in relation to the international legal framework, which means quite specifically the Victims' Rights Directive and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and to really try and see how people's rights are upheld or not, and what the gaps are, and what the shortcomings and limitations are of current legislation. And thirdly, we will be producing a set of practical tools that we will be rolling out through the countries as well as internationally. So thank you all very much, and yeah.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
Thank Jofi, who is behind.
Yes, Jofi and Bruno, who are our technical assistants. Thank you.